Okay, class, so in this video what I want to talk about is unions and key legislation that's been passed regarding unions. Okay, so an important point with unions, okay, is they enter into this process that we call collective bargaining. Okay, collective bargaining is when the union, okay, and management representatives, those are people from the employer, okay, they get together and they work out issues such as wages, the working conditions, and what the hiring and firing practices are going to be um, in the agreement that they come to, okay? So unions, okay, they gained a lot of power during the Great Depression, okay? So it was thought that workers, they needed certain protections, they needed to unionize to protect themselves from their employers, okay? They felt like they were being mistreated. So they came together and they formed a union and they started to enter into this collective bargaining process to advocate for better working conditions, for better wages, for more fair hiring and firing practices. Okay, now there's unions still exist. I would say they're not quite as common as they used to be, but they're still around, okay? They're still a part of our economic framework in the United States. Okay. Now, key legislation that we're going to look at. We're going to take a look at the NORRIS-LAGUARDIA Act that was signed in 1932, the Wagner Act that was signed in 1935, the TAFT-HARTLEY Act back in 1947, and the LANDRUM-GRIFFIN Act, okay, back in 1959. So we can see how these pieces of legislation, even though they're old, they still are very significant in our society. Okay, so the first piece of legislation I want to look at is the NORRIS-LAGUARDIA Act. Okay, now what this did is it outlaws companies from forcing employees not to join a union as a condition of their employment. Okay, so what that means is if there is an employee in a company, they don't have to be part of the union. Okay, they can still work there if they would like, and they can, say, I don't want to be part of the union. That's allowed. Okay, so a company can't force an employee into union representation if they don't want to. Okay, the other thing that this did, it said that federal courts cannot bar labor strikes. Okay, that means that a court can't stop a labor strike from occurring. Okay, the next piece of legislation was the Wagner Act back in 1935. Now, it requires employers to negotiate wages, hours, and conditions of employment with unions. Okay, so if there is a union, okay, it's been established, the employer, they have to negotiate with them on certain things like their wages, hours, and conditions. Okay, it also created the National Labor Relations Board. Okay, now the NLRB, what it does, it hears complaints about unfair labor practices. So if there's an employer out there and the employees feel like they are being unfairly treated, then the NLRB would be who would be that's the board, okay, or the government agency that would hear those complaints and look into it. Okay, I do have here in practice the NLRB. It's a very pro-union organization. Okay, oftentimes it sides with the unions. Okay, so it's going to come in, and the majority of the times it's going to hear the complaint from the union and most likely side with them and try to correct whatever the complaint may be. Okay, now the Taft-Hartley Act, this was a big one. Okay, what it's known as is the Labor Management Relations Act, or the LMRA. Okay, it pushes back on some of the gains of labor unions. Okay, so labor unions, they were becoming very powerful. Okay, so the Taft-Hartley Act kind of restrained them back a little bit. Okay, so one of the things the Taft-Hartley Act did, it told unions that if you are going to go on strike, meaning that all of your members are going to walk out and not go into work anymore, you need to give 60 days notice. You need to say, look, employer, we're going to give you 60 days to figure out whatever issue it is that we feel is unfair. Okay, if it's not resolved in these 60 days, then we're going to go on strike, meaning we're going to walk out and we're not going to come into work anymore. Okay, it also prohibits strikes that endanger the nation's health or safety. Okay, so like air traffic controllers, they can't go on strike in a manner, okay, that is going to create chaos at airports. Okay, so there needs to be some restrictions there for certain types of unions. Okay, it also said the president can stop a strike for up to 80 days. Okay, so the president has the ability to come in and say, look, this strike is ending. If you continue to strike, you're going to be in violation of the law. Okay, he can prevent the strike for 80 days. Now, after those 80 days are up, then they can go back on strike if they need to. Okay, but it's hoped that over that period of time, some sort of agreement could be reached. Okay, it also said that labor unions cannot require employers to hire more employees for a job than are actually needed. Okay, so what was happening was people were coming in, okay, they were getting jobs because of union representation, and the employers were getting too many people, okay, and basically you had employees that weren't doing anything, so it did away with that as well. Okay, and now the last piece of legislation was the Landrum-GRIFFIN Act. This was signed in 1959, okay, and it was designed to reduce union corruption. Okay, so there's a lot of shady business going on in the unions, and the Landrum-GRIFFIN Act tried to prevent some of that. Okay, what it said was unions, they need to have a constitution and bylaws that are registered with the U.S. Secretary of Labor. Okay, meaning that if you're going to have a union, you need to present to the federal government what your rules are as a union. Okay, how do you govern yourself so that it could be reviewed and approved. Okay, it also said that unions, they need to report their revenue and payments to members. Okay, so you don't have union leaders kind of siphoning off the top and taking money and making payments, okay, and kind of doing whatever they want. Okay, there needed to be more transparency in how the money for the union memberships was being handled.